Well, good afternoon. I want to take a moment to say thank you, all of you, for coming out today to be able to participate in this press briefing on this important bill. My name is Mike McGuire, honored to be state senator in California's North Coast. We'll be providing a briefing here today on this important piece of legislation, SB 149, the Presidential Transparency and Accountability Act. It will be heading to the Senate Judiciary Committee today at approximately 1:30. We're going to be hearing from several individuals today, including our principal co-author and partner in this initiative. We're grateful that Senator Scott Wiener is here today. We're also going to be hearing from one of the best constitutional attorneys in the state of California. We are grateful that Professor Ramachandran is here talking about the constitutionality of this bill. And then we want to say thank you to Melanie Herman and Scarlett Bustos from the Sacramento Tax March. They have been organizing for the past many months on this issue, and we're grateful for all their work and their partnership. Absolutely, give them a round of applause, my goodness. This is a nationwide movement from coast to coast. And Senator Wiener and I are honored to present Senate Bill 149. Bottom line is this: transparency is a nonpartisan issue, and it's transparency that provides the basis for accountability in government. And for the past 40 years, every U.S. president, Republicans and Democrats alike, have released their tax returns. These patriots have put the nation's interests above everything else. Presidents are expected to put their own interests aside, whether it be for business ties or relationships with foreign governments, for the greater good of our country. And that greater good for our country is all about America's security and the protection of its people. Income tax returns from presidential candidates provide voters with essential information regarding potential conflicts of interest, domestic and international business dealings, financial status, as well as charitable donations. And while the releasing of tax returns in the past has sparked conversation and debate, all candidates have put their discomfort aside. They have put their own personal discomfort aside for the past 40 years because the releasing of tax returns has become a time-honored tradition in our democracy. This time-honored tradition came to an abrupt halt in the latest presidential election when President Trump refused to release his income tax returns, denying voters the opportunity to fully evaluate the fitness for the office of President of the United States. SB 149 ensures that all future presidential candidates will be barred from appearing on the California primary ballot unless they release their tax returns. Absolutely. And there are important and pressing questions that need to be answered far before Election Day, because unlike members of Congress and federal appointees, presidents are completely exempt from conflict of interest laws. Voters deserve to know, for example, if President Trump is putting America's security at risk through his tangled web of business dealings with corporate interests and his dealings with foreign governments and foreign banks. President Trump is a strong example of why we need this legislation. Let me say, we would be standing here today if Hillary Clinton had decided not to release her tax returns and she won the race. President Trump is not the only one. This bill is not about one specific person or a political party. It's much bigger than that. California voters deserve to know the truth about all presidential candidates before casting their votes as Americans. And in the absence of a federal law mandating that presidential candidates turn over their income tax returns, Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham is exploring legislation to force the president to release his returns in the U.S. Senate. This legislation will be specific to the state of California. Here's what the legislation would do. Number one, a candidate for president, in order to have his or her name placed upon a primary election ballot, would be mandated to file his or her income tax returns from the 5 most recent taxable years with the Secretary of State before the election. In order to protect individual privacy, the Secretary of State will redact income tax returns of presidential candidates. And this has been done for the past 40 years, whether it's George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, or Barack Obama. Their returns must be available to the public on the Secretary of State's website. And states have a central role in providing checks and balances to federal policy. In fact, by the power of the U.S. Constitution, states have the right, California has the right, to determine ballot access requirements. Senator Wiener and I have, for the past many months, been working with some of the brightest constitutional lawyers in America to ensure the strength of this proposed law is able to withstand any potential court challenge. That is why Harvard professor Lawrence Tribe, considered one of the top constitutional lawyers in America, Richard Painter, who is the retired chief ethics lawyer for George W. Bush, and Ambassador Norman Eisen from the Brookings Institute, all support this bill and have written a definitive statement defending this, and that this bill is within the federal Constitution that allows states to create ballot access requirements. In fact, what we know is case law backs up Senate Bill 149. These prominent voices in the legal community firmly believe that this law is constitutional. But to go further in that and to be able to introduce my partner in this initiative, and we would not be where we're at without Senator Scott Wiener, it is my honor to introduce him here to the podium today.
Thank you, Senator McGuire, and it's been a real honor and a pleasure to partner with Mike McGuire on this critically important piece of legislation. Legislation that, unlike in perhaps some other states that are pursuing it, we in California actually have a shot at getting passed and signed into law. This is incredibly important. And I want to stress what Senator McGuire said, that this bill is not a partisan bill, as much as some are always going to cast it that way. This is about all presidential candidates from all political parties, major and minor. We would be making this argument if it were Michael Bloomberg or George Soros in the White House, or Warren Buffett. We need to know, particularly for people with massive business dealings, what their financial circumstances are. It's about transparency, and it applies to all presidential candidates. But we know that Donald Trump exposed this massive loophole, and he exposed it in the most arrogant and brazen way. And let's be clear, we know, and it's becoming abundantly clear, that Donald Trump's most important endorsement in the presidential election apparently was Vladimir Putin. We know that the Russian business interests have invested in Donald Trump, have even, we think, helped prop him up and some of his real estate holdings. We know that there are deep and massive financial connections, not just between Donald Trump and Russia, but between some of his closest affiliates, like Paul Manafort. And we need to know, and the public has a right to know, what those dealings are. And that is exactly the role of the California legislature and any state legislature to be able to say, if you are going to appear on our ballot, you will have to meet some reasonable disclosure requirements. This is not a qualification to run for office, which the state has no power to do. The Constitution sets those qualifications, the age, etc. We're not disqualifying anyone or limiting who can run. We're just saying, in addition to the various forms that you have to fill out to appear on our ballot, whether it's paying a filing fee or collecting signatures, there are all sorts of administrative reasonable requirements that you have to fulfill to appear on the California ballot. And one additional one, a very easy one to satisfy, is to produce 5 years worth of your tax returns. That is a simple, easy requirement. We have all sorts of protections in the bill around privacy and redactions and so forth. So this is a bill that, frankly, I think a lot of people probably assumed already existed, because presidential candidates have already produced this tax information. And so Donald Trump, whatever else one thinks of him, did do us a favor in exposing this glaring loophole, and we're going to close that loophole today. So I want to thank everyone in the community who's been fighting this fight, and let's keep moving forward and let's win. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Wiener, for all of your work. We are now grateful to be able to have Assemblymember Miguel Santiago from the great city of Los Angeles to be able to speak on the importance of presidents releasing their taxes. Ladies and gentlemen, Assemblymember Santiago.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's come here today. It is absolutely important, particularly now that we've seen what this administration has been doing. We've got to take a look at who he's invested with, what kind of resources he's had, what kind of earnings he's made, and who's his relationships as it relates to financial earnings. This is really important, and I'll tell you why. Because over the last 2 months, we have seen things that we've never seen in the Oval Office. We have now witnessed immigration raids. We have now witnessed billionaires and millionaires running the cabinet and his offices. We have now seen a president who has close ties to Russia. We have now seen a failed travel ban. We have now seen an attempt to roll back healthcare. And we've now seen an attempt to roll back climate change. So somebody ought to ask the question, is there a financial reason? Is there an interest that we ought to know about that drives this agenda? Because I can't imagine that somebody goes to public office to get rid of someone's health care. And I can't imagine that somebody gets elected to say, hey, let's make the environment a little more polluted. I can't imagine that somebody comes to office and says, let's go fund $50 billion in the military if somebody's not going to make some money off of it. And these are very serious questions. Now, we've got a right to know, particularly because it's been a tradition for a president of the United States of America, the most powerful nation in the world, to disclose their taxes. Now, if there's nothing to hide, then you ought to disclose them. But if you've got something to hide, well, I can see why you want to hide them. But look, this has been both something Democrats have done, this has been something Republicans have done. This is a bipartisan issue that really needs some attention. We ought to know if there's a financial interest in the policies that he's pushing forward. This is a basic question, and that's why on the Assembly side I've introduced H.R. 13, which is a resolution that calls on the president to release his taxes over the last 5 years. This is a critical question that we need to ask, and we also need to get behind and support, as our colleagues in the Senate have talked about, SB 149. And I think jointly working together both houses, we're gonna get Donald Trump to show us what his taxes are and what his true motives are behind the policies that he's pushed forward. So I want to thank... Si hay medios de comunicación aquí en español, esto es muy importante porque nosotros merecemos saber, como el público, qué inversiones tiene este presidente. Esto es muy importante. Jamás se ha visto un presidente que ha hecho las cosas que ellos han tratado de hacer en los últimos 100 años. Quieren quitarnos el cuidado médico. Quieren invertir más en guerras. Quieren mandarnos a México, aunque seamos de diferentes países. Nunca se ha visto esto. A lo menos deberíamos de saber dónde ha invertido su dinero. ¿Dónde gana su dinero? ¿Cuántos ingresos ha pagado? Y eso es algo que nosotros necesitamos que saber y es por eso que estamos siguiendo con la lucha ahora. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember, and we're grateful for your partnership as well and for all of your work. We are now honored to be able to bring up Southwestern Law School professor. She is one of the best and brightest when it comes to constitutional law here in the state of California. And please give a warm welcome to Professor Ramachandran.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm Gauri Ramachandran, as Senator McGuire said. I teach at Southwestern in Los Angeles. I teach constitutional law. So I get to teach about a number of amazing topics, but I have a particular passion for voting rights, having volunteered my time to various voter protection efforts over the years. And over the past decade, we've seen state after state pass laws such as voter ID laws that aim to restrict the rights of voters. And frankly, it's very depressing to teach the subject. So I was very happy to accept Senator McGuire's invitation to speak to the constitutionality of SB 149, because I think this bill is finally good news for the Constitution and for voter rights. It actually seeks to improve information and transparency for voters by respecting their right to make fully informed choices about who to nominate for the highest offices in the country. In my opinion, this bill would not only very likely withstand any constitutional challenges, it's a positive for those who care about voters and their crucial role in our constitutional system. The reason the bill is constitutional is that states have the authority to reasonably regulate access to the printed ballot by candidates for office, as Senator Wiener mentioned. And SB 149 is very reasonable. It promotes a value that's not only legitimate but extremely important, which is the interest of voters in having full information about the candidates that they're asked to cast a ballot for. And even better, it provides that information without requiring the candidates to do anything very difficult. They just have to file those forms. They're not asked to file for candidacy extremely early. They're not asked to gather a large number of petition signatures. They're not asked to move their residence. It's really easy for candidates to comply with this bill, and that's part of the reason why I'm confident that it would withstand any constitutional challenge. You might have seen commentary saying it's unconstitutional because it adds qualifications for being president, but really doesn't do that. The reason that states can't add qualifications for the office of the presidency or for any federal office is that voters need to be free to choose who they want for those offices. But SB 149 doesn't restrict the voter's choice. It just asks the candidate to disclose his or her taxes, if in fact there are any taxes that the candidate filed. So everyone's capable of doing that. It doesn't keep the voters from choosing who they wish. There's maybe some voters who don't care about the information in those tax returns or who care about other issues more, but those voters don't have an interest in keeping the rest of the voters who do care about the information from obtaining those information. There's no such thing as a right of voters to keep other voters from knowing information about a candidate. So as you can tell, I believe this bill would very likely be upheld in the courts, and it's for good reason. It's because it promotes the role of voters in our democratic system, and it actually supports them. Thanks.
We're grateful to the professor and our entire legal team who's been working on this bill for the past many months. And again, Professor, we're grateful that you're here today and for all of your efforts. April 15th is going to be a big day for the United States of America. Hundreds of thousands of neighbors are going to be turning out in the streets from Sacramento to New York, from Los Angeles to Des Moines, demanding that President Donald Trump releases his tax returns. And absolutely. And here in Sacramento is no different. We are honored to be able to introduce two amazing women, Melanie Herman and Scarlett Bustos, who are the co-chairs of the Tax March here in Sacramento, to talk with you about the importance of President Donald Trump releasing his tax returns. And I just want to say thank you to Melanie and Scarlett for all of their work. Let's give them a round of applause.
Good afternoon, I'm Melanie Herman. This is my partner, Scarlett Bustos. Together, we are organizing Tax March Sacramento. More than roughly 100,000 people in California are interested in marching on April 15th, along with people from 120 other cities in the United States. This is a widespread movement across the country to ask President Trump to release his tax returns. Tax returns detail much more about a president's finances than campaign finance disclosure documents, which is what he's been trying to tell us to use all along. His tax returns will reveal whether the decisions he makes now and in the future are designed to benefit himself and his family's interests, or the interests of his financial partners, or the interests of the American people. And he obviously wants to hide something, otherwise he would have made that phone call to his lawyer long ago telling him just release 5 years of tax returns. It's not as if he has to copy them himself and release these documents. It would take one phone call from him. It's not a big ask here. 63% of Americans believe this act of transparency is so important that they want Congress to pass a law requiring it. While we can't expect the current Congress to pass such a law, California is once again taking the lead in this important fight. Senators Mike McGuire and Scott Wiener listened to the people of California and created SB 149, which would require the candidates to release their tax returns. they've been speaking today about that, and Mike McGuire specifically was talking about the importance of presidential tax returns. So Scarlett now is our spokesperson. She's here to answer any questions you may have about it. So thank you very much for coming today. Stay here, okay.
Tax March is a national and international movement for transparency in government, starting with the president. Countries around the world and here in Sacramento, and here across the U.S., will demand Donald Trump's tax returns to be released on April 15th. And we need you to be with us. Are you with us?
Yes.
Are you with us? Together, we will all demand the release of his tax returns. We will demand transparency. We will demand to know the conflicts of interest, and we will expose any corruption if there be any. Thank you so much for coming, and please accompany us into the Judiciary hearing room, where we will speak also on behalf of
SB
SB
149.
149.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to be able to see if there are any questions or comments. And I know that the senator has to chair a committee meeting right now, and we're going to be heading into Judiciary, but would welcome any questions or comments that anyone has. All right. Please.
Is this any different from, say, a red state requiring presidential candidates to release their birth certificates?
Well, number one, I think that is a racist red herring, asking a U.S. citizen to be able to release his birth certificate, number one. But number two, this is 40 years of tradition in our democracy. Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama have all released their tax returns. All of these patriots have put their self-interest behind them and put the interests of America first. And this is what this bill is about. It's about our nation's security and about protecting the American people, and to ensure that our president does not have a tangled web of foreign business interests or ties to foreign government. So I think that there is a very clear difference in regards to tax returns versus the racist red herring when it comes to Barack Obama, who is a U.S. citizen, and trying to get him to release his birth certificate. Other questions or comments?
Well, Senator, what if you then folded in all of the actual constitutional requirements for one to be president? Would that maybe not take away the racist factor of it? I mean, those are the actual requirements in the Constitution, the residency requirements. Why shouldn't a candidate have to prove all of those things?
Well, first of all, I don't think it was ever a question that, unless you can tell me differently, that Barack Obama wasn't a citizen of the United States. But I'd be welcome to hear.
I'm not talking about just President Obama. I'm talking about all of them.
Okay. So, number one, states have the right, and there's a two-point test that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued back in 2000. Their two-point test is this: is a ballot access. It's not a ballot access argument. Number one, if it bars a candidate for qualifying. Or number two, it handicaps a class of candidates. And what we believe, and what the courts have ruled in regards to ballot access, this is simply a bureaucratic paperwork issue that is being brought forward by the state of California. And what we know is, number one, releasing tax returns does not bar candidates for filing or running. It's been done for the past 40 years by Republicans and Democrats alike. And then number two, it's simply procedural and does not handicap a candidate. In fact, what a ballot access requirement is a filing fee, a fee waiver, paperwork, simply a bureaucratic step to be able to run for president. And as the U.S. Constitution states, states have the ability and the right to be able to set ballot access requirements. What they don't get to do is decide what the specific qualifications are, age, U.S. citizen, which is why this is a ballot access argument and not a qualification argument. Other questions or comments that anyone may have? So we're going to be heading into the Judiciary Committee. I want to take a moment again to say thank you to our amazing activists who are here today for all of their work. And also want to say thank you all for coming. We're really grateful that you would take time in your busy schedule. And we'll see you in Judiciary here in just a few minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. Great job. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for all your work. Thank you.
I turned to the side and I saw them staring. I was like,
They're not going to let us take it. Thank you.